Today's episode is brought to you by the Vegas Beer Guys and the Sounds in Cinema podcast.
Everything sequel contains explicit language. And why the fudge not, you melon farmer?
Hello and welcome to the Everything Sequel podcast. This is the Naked Gun edition. Today we're talking The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear. I am, of course, Michael Shantz of the How Dare You Awards. Joining me, as always, the Mad Brit, your friend, Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. Say hi, Tom.
This is Frank Drebin, Police Squad. Throw down your guns and come on out with your hands up. Or come on out, then throw down your guns, whichever way you want to do it. Just remember the two key elements. 1, guns down. 2, come on out.
See, now that's when the cop shit works for me.
Oh my god, it's so
that stuff
funny.
I love.
What was great, I thought that was hilarious, and then I realized, having recently done Batman v Superman on a watch along,
yeah,
that could have been a real line in Zack Snyder's Batman v Superman.
Absolutely.
There are lines like that with that many options in that have no irony.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're really onto something about, film dialogue that's taking itself too seriously.
Well, and one of my favorite things is right after that when the cops have the house surrounded and the bad guy kind of ping, like one bullet. It looks like he's holding all the cards, Frank.
Yeah.
Fucking great.
That scene, there's so many gags in that scene that are some of my all-time favorites.
Mm-hmm.
They're located in that scene, but this time around I couldn't ignore the fact that it was, police brutality and low-income housing, and ended with O.J. Simpson in a militarized police vehicle. It almost ruined what have for me been all-time highs in comedy movies.
In comedy, right?
And that struggle is real when watching these movies.
And that's my struggle with this whole movie. The amount of comedy mined out of police brutality is hard. That one got to me this time.
And disability too.
Oh yeah.
I think.
I mean, I'm not saying it's the only thing, but I just,
No, it's not the only thing.
Yeah.
Because we haven't yet talked about homophobia, which is also a big thing here.
Yeah. But I'm just like you were talking about the comedy hit rate.
Yeah.
At 70?
75.
Or rather 75.
I think it's about 76.
Right.
It's right there on the line.
But the amount of police brutality jokes, there are more of those jokes in this movie than any other single joke. And that's rough, man. That's rough.
It's rough. It's rough and it's you have to look at the intention of the joke, and it's there's jokes about police brutality that are kind of self-inflicted jokes, that are jokes aimed at the police.
Yes.
And then there's those that are, purely about, that are aimed basically at liberals who say the police brutality is, is excessive. So it swings both ways. And to some extent, I think that's permissible in the kind of comedy that they're doing here, which is avowedly bad taste comedy. But even allowing for that, it's when you start to see kind of patterns, like a certain, like humor targeted at one specific minority group.
Right.
In a concentrated fashion again and again and again. That's the only time I start to get uncomfortable with it is when I say, well, there's a lot of jokes about gay people. Like, we're in the double digits now.
Right.
There's something more going on here than being politically incorrect in a kind of general sense where you're offending everyone all the time. Because if that was the case, there would, it wouldn't be concentrated towards specific minority groups repeatedly.
Yes.
So that's where I kind of I draw the line. But to drag it back to comedy, as we're going to have to keep doing throughout this podcast, I find that 76% hit rate is I think where it's at, and a lot of that is jokes that count as double because they're like rephrased.
Right. No. Absolutely.
Rephrase jokes from the original, or they're running gags, or jokes that are even repeated within the frame of the movie that work. And when that works, it's like that's a 3-pointer right there.
Well, and for me too, structurally, there are some great written jokes in this movie.
And yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And like you said, the hit rate is at such a high rate. And also, a lot of this movie is silly.
Yes.
And I adore silliness. I mean, I will latch on to silliness.
But silly, you mean you got it right on the money there, because it's silliness done in a very smart way.
Yeah, right.
And those moments in the movie are just sublime. I'm still in awe of when you see something that is so structurally ingrained into the movie and yet produces a really stupid joke.
Yeah, right.
And this is late on in the movie, but something that really stood out to me this time was the mopping, the sliding on the floor after a mopping gag. They're about to get into an elevator, and in the previous scene, we've seen a custodian mop the floor.
Mopping. And all three of them.
It's just like, and then, they go there, they slide right past the elevator door. And me breaking it down to you sounds ridiculous and not funny. But if you saw the care and attention with which this joke was built for this really buffoonish payoff.
Yes.
You can admire that level of craft.
And I feel the same way. This movie has one of my all-time favorite jokes, and it's 2 jokes in succession.
Okay.
Because one is character-based and one is wordplay.
Oh, interesting.
So when he goes to the scene of the crime, of the first explosion,
yes,
and he's seeing Jane for the first time, and then she starts taking him around the place.
Yeah.
And he says, "Jane, can you tell me a little bit about this man?" And she says, "He was a Caucasian." And his response is, "Caucasian?" And she has to explain to him, "Yeah, a white guy. He had a mustache, about 6'3", awfully big mustache." I fucking lose it every time I watch this movie. 6'3", awfully big mustache. Love it.
That's absolutely wonderful.
It's
really
so
good.
I just adore it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I can't disagree with that. I mean, if we're talking about our favorite moments up front, why not? I have a feeling it's going to get darker.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, one of the greatest running gags in any comedy movie is the animals being released from the zoo.
Oh, yeah.
Every time you think this gag can't come back, it comes back.
I've said this in one of our previous podcasts, and I'll say it again. Last time it was in a hallway in Gremlins 2. This time I think it was in front of a hotel or something. It's on the street. But you don't know how funny a galloping giraffe is until you see it.
That's right. Well, this movie obviously knows that.
Yeah.
But I always remember watching as a kid and just picking out that moment, and it's like, why do I enjoy it so much? And as an adult, I know it's because of the way the gag is structured over the course of the movie, and that's always the missing element in comedy movies that don't work, is where the
Mhm.
screenplay itself and the direction and everything is working towards the comedy. It's not just one element.
Yes.
And that's what so many comedy movies miss. You can't just have a
Get
funny
wrong. Right, exactly.
You can't just have one, you just can't have one funny guy running around a movie and it be a funny movie. You need everyone to be on the same page. When I saw Coming Digit to America, while I
Yeah.
enjoyed some of the performances, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at another time,
At some point, right.
I remember thinking, where's John Landis? Where is the comedy direction? Where's the comedy writing?
Mm-hmm.
And this movie is so good at that. And one of the reasons I gravitate towards this more than the original movie, which is a little bit more set piecey, is that I think they disperse the comedy a little better
Okay.
in this one across the screenplay, across the supporting cast. It's less of a Leslie Nielsen. Like, some of my favorite lines come from supporting characters.
Yeah, yeah.
Or well, not my favorite lines, but favorite comedy
Favorite
moments.
parts, scenes, yeah, bits.
I find actually all through the supporting cast, all the way from Anthony James to Richard Griffiths, I think this movie is
Yeah, exactly.
quality.
Anthony James, Richard Griffiths, just a delight.
It's really one of things that all these movies get right, but for some reason really reads for me in this one is, and this goes back to Police Squad undoubtedly, where the cast of Police Squad and even to an extent Airplane could be in the non-ironic version of this story just as easily. Right. And for some reason here, when I think about Anthony James, who is this incredible Hollywood character actor,
wonderful, skinny and Unforgiven.
Yeah, Unforgiven, also In the Heat of the Night. This
Right.
guy has really got some chops as a character actor. The fact that because I can see a world where they cast, plays a henchman basically,
Yeah,
an assassin. I can see a world in which they put Weird Al Yankovic in that role.
Mm-hmm.
But this movie is smart enough.
He's in all three of these movies, so
and he's in this movie.
yeah,
playing a similar role. Right. He's also a guy who shoots up the police department. But the fact that they've gone with the real guy instead of the spoof
guy,
yeah,
the spoof, right?
To do the spoof, it makes all the difference.
Yeah, exactly.
And even a little, I know Richard Griffiths is an accomplished comic actor, and even at that time was known for that, but he wasn't there because he was a comedian. He was there because he was a British theatre actor.
Yeah.
And they wanted to drop things on his head and laugh.
Right.
And that is exactly the right call. Although, towards the end of this movie, I was like, is that literally... It almost felt like they were trying to challenge themselves to give Richard Griffiths things that he wouldn't make funny. Because by the end of the movie, it's like they hand things in his lap that don't seem funny. And he makes everything funny.
Everything.
Literally, it's like comedy alchemy. You just hand... I'm sure it was like, it's not even a gag when you gave it to him. That speech he gives, the most boring speech in the world, right. And it absolutely reads that way, and there's no jokes. Right. No jokes. That is all Richard Griffiths is acting.
Well, but not just that, but we haven't even talked quite yet, but, for the benefit of the listeners, we're talking about The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear, which was a 1991 movie.
Oh, yeah, let's do that bit.
Directed by David, is it Zucker?
Yeah.
Do you say Zucker or Zucker?
I've never said
I think it's Zucker.
Zucker.
All right. But if you don't know these guys, you should, or you do and don't realize it, because they're responsible for Airplane and Top Secret. Of course, at some point, they started doing the scary movies 3, 4, and 5. But he also did Basketball and Ruthless People. This particular movie ups the budget a bit. This budget is $23 million, which is like almost double the original budget. But this movie outdid the original in every way. Opening weekend 20.8 and USA and the World $86.9 million.
I did not know that.
Yeah, the original was like 78, so barely, but did. But I wanted to say that to get to this because I wanted to say this movie was made in 1991, so we are 30 years from when this movie was made, and I have never for a moment forgotten Richard Griffiths saying he thrust his purple-headed warrior into a quivering mound of love pudding.
And why would you?
The quizzical nature, excuse me, the quizzical nature by which he's reading that erotic book. I mean, it just cracked me up 30 years ago and still cracks me up today.
Well, I mean, we recently did a Highlander 2 watch along, which was also from 1991. So it'll be no surprise to anyone who saw that. Mike's 30-year recall is pretty photographic. He remembers things from Highlander 2 that I forgot watching it twice in 2 days. But also, this is another ozone layer related storyline. And I after watching Highlander 2 and this back to back, I just thought there really must have been some buzz about the ozone layer in 1991 for two big Hollywood movies to make it the center of their story,
right?
But and we alluded to this in the minisode that you need to understand 1991 to understand big parts of this movie. It begins with,
of course. Oh yeah.
It begins with George and this is how long ago this is that we have to explain. This is not even the most recent Bush presidency. This is Herbert W. Bush.
This is HW.
Yeah. With once again a celebrity impersonator. And the movie basically begins with Frank Drebin brutally beating Barbara Bush.
Yeah.
For a good 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Remember, this movie is 1 minute 25. There's about 5 minutes of, and it happens at the end as well. I'd say conservatively, there's about 7 minutes of Barbara Bush
just
being
Barbara
beaten
Bush
up in this
getting
movie.
Beaten up. Right.
I don't know what that is fractionally, but that's a lot of a 1 minute 25 movie.
There's a moment too because they're walking in, and of course the door flies open, and out comes Drebin, and the door hits Barbara Bush. And so there's this moment where Secret Service is kind of ushering her to her chair, and you see her tweak her nose, and you hear a little crack.
Yeah.
And
it's merciless.
Like, the tiny details really matter with this kind of comedy. I gotta tell you.
Yeah, and it's just it's certainly setting out its stall. Early on. I've got a good quick fact for you, friend. Oh, okay.
Nobody listening to this will know this, I'm sure, but Tom and I have written together Space Force, which we put up a couple years ago. Last year?
No,
how long's it been?
It's getting on a couple of years, yeah.
All right. Time is slowly, but
this is the most depressing podcast in the world.
Yeah,
because this movie has made us realize how old and decrepit we are.
Exactly. But to let you personally know, like, the effect this movie had on me and how I feel about comedy, there's a joke from this movie in Space Force.
Yeah.
And it's essentially the same thing, except we're not standing in the body because we were doing it on stage, and that would be difficult to do. But again, when they go to that first initial explosion, and he says, "Are there any other victims?" And he goes, "You're standing on one now, Frank."
Yeah.
And you don't see it, and he just and he steps off the body. Love it.
And we mentioned in the minisode about Airplane 2 and how the repeated couple business, the romantic couple, reuniting really annoyed us because it was clearly like they couldn't think of anything new to put in there.
Right.
Here, it really doesn't feel that way. When he reunites with Priscilla Presley as Jane, it for want of a better word, feels very authentic.
I agree.
They and partly they up the ante by making him, jealous and bitter, and they've already split up once, and so they're able to make comic headway with jokes about Frank's jealousy. So you can go somewhere different with it.
Yeah.
But essentially it is the same, and Robert Goulet is a very deliberate surrogate for Ricardo Montalban.
A complete, yeah, exactly.
Which is very canny because they're getting a surrogate character that's not just the same type of on-screen character; it's also the same kind of star presence coming into the movie.
Exactly.
But a little, like no offense to Robert Goulet, but a little more low rent, which is exactly what you do in a sequel.
Right.
And I'm sure he was comfortable being the butt of that joke.
Right.
Because that's what you sign up for when you do these kind of movies, I think.
All right. Well, we're just getting started, everybody. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Tom and I are going to dive deeper into the smell of fear right after this.
I like to think I know something about beer, but nowadays even I get overwhelmed when confronted by the exhaustive selection of craft beers they have at bars, breweries, and even grocery stores. Back in the day you had one, maybe two craft beers to choose from, and if you were confused, you ordered a Guinness. But in beerstinations like San Diego, the craft beer options lately are in double, sometimes even triple digits. So what's a beer drinker to do? You need what I need, the Vegas Beer Guys. Your beer of choice should be a perfect blend of malt and hops. And so a live show about beer needs that same balance. And the Vegas Beer Guys matches beer expert Dan Aker with self-proclaimed beer novice Stephen J. Weiss. The results are eminently drinkable. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram. They'll try new beers, they'll tell you about beer. Think of them as your beer Sherpas guiding you up a foamy-headed mountain to reach the peak of your pint. God, I need a beer.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Tom and I are here discussing the 1991 sequel, The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear. As we've mentioned before, Tom, best title in the series.
Yep.
Just fantastic.
And that, the title alone is already, a sequel parody. I think that's,
yeah.
Like from top to bottom, this movie, it's parodying the unnecessary subtitles,
right?
The unnecessarily complex numbering systems of sequels. Like in just that one title, and basically everything we've been talking about since this podcast began is
exactly
is summed up.
And then it's followed by David Zucker's credit, which says "Unfilmed."
Yes.
David Zucker.
And then a great joke about expositions titles where you see the White House and then it says the White House and then Washington D.C.
Right. Well, I also love because, like you'd expect, kind of a retcon. They're just all in Washington D.C. for no reason whatsoever.
No apparent reason.
There's just no apparent reason for Police Squad, for Jane, for everybody from the first story that's coming back to be in D.C.
Yeah, that's it. The sequel-like retcons of this movie are entirely baked in.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it. I mean, within minutes, we're looking at someone looking at photographs of people who are in the movie. So it's very intentional from top to bottom in this movie. I think it's undeniable. It's not even on the fence. Because also, the new Police Squad commissioner looks unnervingly like Nancy
So-
Marchand, who plays the
Oh,
mayor
yeah.
in the original movie.
I had
And-
to look it up to make sure it was a different person. 'Cause
Right,
they
exactly,
look
me too.
They look so much alike.
So they're definitely playing on that meta level when it comes to
Yeah.
sequels.
Absolutely.
This
So
is
we're
one more
in
thing to
Washington,
like.
D.C., and
For no reason, as you say, yeah.
for no reason. And of course, we have a similar thing to the first movie in which a kind of a tycoon type character is going to decide to murder a doctor because
I
he's
think
going to
you're
be
being
in part.
generous when you say similar. I think that's giving it a little too much variety there.
Wow. You're right. You're right.
No, that's. I mean, it's just perfect.
But there's there's like all kinds of just great bits because these tycoons are going to try to murder the man who's going to come up with the energy policy for the country
hmm
with acronyms like spill, smoke, and kaboom.
yeah.
You know, the oil industry. Man, I it's just there's just so much care into the written jokes of this movie, and I just
There
love
is,
it.
and what struck me was, and you alluded to this, was saying, a character joke immediately followed by wordplay. It's the fact that there are so many different kinds of jokes all working together in a fairly coherent whole, at least in this movie. Because we get a lot of political satire in that first scene with Bush and also John Sununu.
Right.
Is in the mix, and the ozone layer and energy, but it's
what did Drebin call the ozone layer?
I can't remember. I wish I could. But there's also a lobster claw biting a woman's breast. So
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
There's a lot of that throughout this whole series. There's lots of grabbing cock and boob jokes
right.
just all over the place.
And I whatever it means representationally, which is generally bad.
Mhm.
That in the intention is to take anything that feels too elevated or too high-minded needs to be taken down within the frame of the film. And I
Right.
think one of the ways that you can be an apologist for brutally beating a woman as the first comic set piece of the movie is that it's Barbara Bush and she needs to be taken down a peg because that's the implication.
Right.
It's not because
Yeah.
she's the first
It's not
lady.
because she's a woman. It's not because
Right. It's because she needs to be taken down a peg, and I feel that as soon as anything feels too sophisticated, shall we say, they immediately bring it. They bring it down to earth with a comic crash.
Yeah.
So that feels very, very deliberate. Again, really, all it comes down to is just when you start to see patterns of that's a lot of jokes about gay people. That's
Transsexual.
why is O.J. Simpson swinging on a rope like Tarzan?
Yeah. Right. Yes.
It's the 7-Eleven without an interpreter line. It's just
Which is extra uncomfortable because now you're in the position of trying to stick up for O.J. Simpson.
yeah. So it's that's where it gets difficult, but I don't want anyone to think that I don't understand and appreciate the politics of bad taste comedy, and that requires a certain level of offensiveness.
Right.
It's when that offensiveness is disproportionate towards one community that I start to get uncomfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that this kind of movie needs to take those pot shots where it can.
Yeah.
But it should be doing it in a democratic way, and sometimes I feel like one minority group is getting the fuzzy end of the lollipop a lot of the time.
Right. Well, and so where do you stand on this movie and police brutality? Because there's still plenty of jokes that work and are funny, but in the light of everything that's happening in our world today,
Yeah.
it's hard to watch. I mean, Drebin's introduced at the beginning of the movie as having killed his 100th drug dealer.
Right.
But then it's immediately followed by him saying, "To be fair, I backed over the last 2 with my car." We found out later, luckily, that they happened to be drug dealers.
But then the joke's on the that's what I mean about in that case the joke's on the police
But exactly.
officer.
Like, and so
But it
much
isn't
of it
always.
has to do with Drebin as a character.
Yeah.
This sort of kindly, white-haired old man, but who loves to pull out his gun and shoot people.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with him not being the sharpest tool in the shed.
Mm-hmm.
So it coming back on him and like the stupidity. But I have to imagine, even in 91, African Americans are watching this movie way different than we are.
Right, yeah, and that's a really
You know?
important point. Is it's actually like in that scene where they, obviously like a low income housing area.
Yeah.
The police are surrounding the house and just blowing it up and then driving a tank through it, and yeah, like there's people watching this movie who would have tragically lived that or tragically witnessed that firsthand. That would be different. And it's I don't know if I already said this, but like my favorite running gag of the animals getting released from the zoo, like
Right.
I'd never connected the dots that happens because of militarized police vehicle
Smashes through
smashes through
the
wall. So I'm
the
like,
wall of a zoo.
I'm like,
Yeah.
that almost ruins it for me.
Right.
But not enough. I think the balance is still pretty much there, but I was what you said about the police brutality, I kind of felt the same when it came to race here, and
Mm-hmm.
and I'm in the uncomfortable position of feeling sorry for O.J. Simpson and how he's used in this movie, but
Right.
in this one and not in the next one, curiously, which is the far inferior movie. In this one, he's almost there as a kind of Sammy Davis Jr. figure, just to be kind of, well, but like, in the way that the Rat Pack used to use Sammy Davis Jr.
Right.
One, to make it okay to joke,
To joke about race.
to make racist jokes,
Yeah.
and 2, to roundlessly mock and humiliate.
Yeah.
And that's built into the Norberg character. That's fine. But the scene I was really uncomfortable with, apart from him swinging on the rope, which is such an oversight, I can't believe they didn't think about the connotations of that, and him in the militarized police vehicle. But that's not even what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the scene where they're talking about boxing for some reason. And he says, all I
Yes.
know is never bet on the white guy. And even O.J. Simpson's reaction is kind of like, that's too far. You can sort of see him in the background of the shot. Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to react to this, both as the actor and the character, because it's such a racist line. And I think, the only reason he's in the background of that shot is so they feel that they can make that joke. And it's strange. It's,
but it's
there are
like
a few
that,
just off-color, to excuse the
problem
pun,
is that's
off-color
the-
moments.
Yeah, the problem is that joke is the button for a series of jokes that just have to do with boxing names and city names.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't
which is all fine.
It doesn't need that button.
No, exactly.
And I don't think they would have done it if they didn't think it was okay because O.J. Simpson was in the scene.
Yeah.
And there's a few moments I have like that. But they're also the point where they don't quite know how to use him.
But that's it's strange you say that too, because that was a huge part of O.J. Made in America was at that time his having to be like to be on TV.
Mm-hmm.
Even as an announcer after his career was over, it was like he had to get to a point where white America didn't consider him black.
Right.
And that's what happened in that moment and in this movie. It's like, that's why, that's why they can put him in that scene, in that moment, as if it doesn't matter.
Right.
Because that's the point that he'd gotten to, where he must have felt like he had to get to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about this in the next movie more, but I mean, I think O.J. Made in America is one of the best documentaries of all
incredible.
time. Certainly I'd say one of the best movies, if you want to call it a movie, because it's 5 hours long, of the last decade for hands down.
Absolutely.
So it's really it's really interesting, but it's very noticeable how off the pace of the comedy he is in this compared to like the third movie and the first movie, which I was surprised he's barely in. Really,
he's barely in it, right? Because he's always
really
in the
more
hospital.
of a cameo. This is the first time they're kind of using him as.
But he's got one of my favorite moments in that movie when he gets shot at the beginning, and my favorite part of that is because he basically what happens is a series like he bonks his head, and that's what hurts, and the bear trap and all that shit. But the best part to me is when he gets his shoulder on the paint.
Yes.
Because he goes up against the wall and he goes, "Oh no."
Yeah.
Like that "oh no" is fucking great.
In this one they kind of forget to find a character for him.
Yeah.
Which really stands out because the rest of the cast is firing on all cylinders. The rest of the main cast. We talked about Anthony James Anthony James playing it straight as a henchman because he knows how to play that part for real. Likewise,
but then you have him loading a gun outside her shower, singing, and I mean, it's amazing. It's so wonderful.
But in the main cast, I mean, I have
tears coming down his cheeks, Tom.
Yeah, I know.
Come on.
That's why you need the real guy. I think that's
exactly.
it. The joke only works when it's the real guy. It doesn't work when it's a comedian trying to do that. And on a similar theme, speaking of character actors. For some reason, I have severely underappreciated George Kennedy until now. The work he is doing.
In all these movies, yeah.
He really.
Do you know that they weren't going to let the original Naked Gun? They did not want to do that movie without a serious actor.
Yeah.
They felt like they needed somebody of gravitas, somebody with weight.
What are you talking about? The guy from Police Squad is a cop in Highlander. What more gravitas do you need?
I know. But so they went to George Kennedy, and there was, he agreed to do it, and that's what kind of got that movie off the ground.
Well, I mean, in this movie, certainly he is just the perfect straight man.
Yeah.
To Frank, but also just to the movie.
To the movie itself.
I have a note here that says George Kennedy and a mechanical dildo on a stick.
Exactly.
I have no extra note for this.
It's
just
his
want to
reaction.
remind myself that it happened.
It's his reaction to it.
I think it's great, and I also I want to talk. We're talking about a lot of men.
Is this some kind of bust? Yes, it's very impressive.
Priscilla Presley. Here's what I think. I don't know how much she knows what she's doing, but she pitches everything perfectly.
Yeah.
I don't know if she is some great acting genius and she's been able to hide it all these years.
That's where my mind went to, and I was so shocked that, I mean, it's these three movies, Ford Fairlane, and almost nothing else.
Dallas.
I mean, other than Dallas, of course, but Dallas was before all of that.
I'm sure she had to act a lot being married to Elvis Presley for 2 years.
For sure. But
acts not offended by him cheating on with lots of women.
Yeah. So I was just kind of astonished to see that, somewhere in between all of these movies, Ford Fairlane got made, but it's like that movie and these three movies, and for a film career, that's about it. And she's really good in these movies.
Yeah, and I was trying to I was using Dallas as the kind of barometer in the same way that, they're channeling so much of Anthony James from his character actor roles. I'm wondering how much they're channeling the soap actress
Mm,
to do the kind of the parody of, bad dialogue and
Right.
bad film continuity and all that sort of stuff that you associate with soap opera. But she always seems on top of the comic material in a way that makes me think maybe she just knows instinctively how to make this comedy work, because
right.
in that, if she was ever overplaying it or even underplaying it for that matter, it would not land.
Mm-hmm.
If she ever looked like she knew too much about what was going on, the comedy of it is ruined.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I mean, I really admire Leslie Nielsen, and I'm not about to say anything negative about him. I'm just going to talk briefly about the differences between the Leslie Nielsen performances in Police Squad and to a great extent Airplane
Mm-hmm.
and the Naked Gun movies. In those earlier incarnations, he was still doing parody and pastiche and all the things he's doing here, but he's doing it in a way that is indistinguishable from the real thing.
Yeah.
But the Naked Gun movies,
A little different.
that's not the case, because
Yeah.
he's mugging to camera a lot.
Right.
He's finding himself as a comic actor. He has full-on
But he still has
physical
that thing.
comedy bits.
Yeah. But he also
Uh,
still has that thing where he feels grounded as the
Yeah.
gumshoe detective, so he's still able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's still able to manage those things, and I've seen him interviewed and I've heard him talk about his admiration for Chaplin, Charlie Chaplin, not the
That
Robert
makes
Downey
sense.
Jr. movie. And I think a lot of that mugging to camera is, him kind of discovering that side of himself, that this to sort of, because this is film comedy as opposed film parody as opposed to Police Squad and Airplane, which I consider to be more media pastiche.
Mm-hmm.
This is more I don't know. I mean, there's obviously parody is here, but it requires him to be more of a movie comedy lead, much more of a
Right.
kind of all-rounder. Because, I mean, that's the fascinating thing about Leslie Nielsen, is that this is the beginnings of his career as a comic actor.
Yeah, exactly. This is the start of the whole second act, you know?
He was the
I mean,
straightest of straight men for so
Right,
many years
for
in,
so
in
long.
Hollywood and TV. Airplane and Police Squad allowed him to make the
up
transition.
Airplane, right.
And this is him fully embracing it and doing comedy as comedy rather than playing comedy straight for comic effect.
Yeah.
And I think it's very, very funny. He can still bring it back to that, but he's got something else going on. But I thought this just quality is written through this entire cast.
Yeah. Top to
Except
bottom.
for O.J. Simpson, but he discovers himself in the next movie, so that was obviously the movie's fault, not his.
Right. All right, let's take one more break, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up with The Naked Gun 2.5. If you like podcasts like I do, boy, do I have a treat for you. You need to
Stay on target.
and check out the Sounds and Cinema podcast. Listen as your host, sound designer and music creator Tony Parham, and co-host, musical performer and sound lover Derek Hansen, D-Rock if you're nasty, and I am, discuss all things sound related to film, television, stage, and theatrical productions. They discuss environmental sounds, bioacoustics, dialogue, the nature of communication through sound, but as an added bonus, they drink beer and try to
Stay on target.
find them wherever you get your podcasts and listen to the pure mania of a man who can charitably be described as Doug, the dog from Up, and another man with a soothing and sultry voice trying to get that man to...
Stay on target.
That's the Sounds and Cinema podcast. Tune in and listen to the sounds they are creating just for you. And we are back yet again, ladies and gentlemen. Tom and I are here, finishing out The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear. All right, Tom. I have one other kind of political beef with this film.
What's the beef? Isn't that an early 90s thing as well?
Well, it was Where, but I like that you changed it. Now, so let me ask you this. Did you notice there's so much that we're talking about mental health right now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have a note that says this is back when we made fun of depression.
Who's depression? Sorry, I'm
Just
blanking.
when we were in the bar, and you have
I didn't even clock that.
You
that
didn't
link.
clock
You're
it. There's
absolutely right.
the cigarette woman, except she's got nooses and she's got revolvers and she's got all kinds of manner of ways for you to end your own life.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
No,
when you're not depressed, I'm sure you might think that's hysterical. But when you are depressed,
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I hadn't even clocked that. But yeah, it's absolutely the
but
case.
it's just, you know, it's
Any-
one of
any
those
kind
things
of-
that's
any
peppered
kind of-
throughout this movie.
Any kind of physical adversity, I think, is game for Comic Lampoon here.
Yeah.
Which is occasionally problematic.
The Naked Gun or the Naked Gun series version of Q, whose wife he's going. What is he going on? Is he going on Phil Donahue?
That's right, yeah.
Transsexual Satan worshiper. His wife is.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we get a few.
But again,
trans
that's
jokes.
also surrounded by the jokes that I like, where he's talking about all the scientific stuff that they're trying to do to find a clue.
Yeah.
And then he picks up a wallet. He says, "Actually, this wallet was at the scene. We haven't had a chance to look at it yet."
Which is kind
That's
of
a sublimely
prescient.
silly joke.
Well, it's also, you know, they're satirizing media that's yet to be made, because, you know, there are whole episodes of CSI
Mhm.
based around that line of investigation.
Right.
And I also, you know, I had a couple of moments where I thought that Mike Myers must have been a big fan of these movies,
Yeah.
because it certainly how
The
they
structure of the Austin Powers movies feels very similar to these.
and the way that they mounted Wayne's World 2 in relation to Wayne's World is very similar to how this sequel interacts with the original movie in a very knowingly repetitive way.
Right.
But yeah, no, and you know the sex gags, the montage of entry. That's the nicest way to say it.
Right.
That comes up again in Austin Powers. This is the origin, at least as far as I can see, is the baddie telling everyone his plan gag,
Yeah, right.
which is, you know, structures the Austin Powers movies. Here it's just kind of thrown away by Robert Goulet in a
He
great...
just says, "All right."
Yeah,
Then he launches
unprompted
into it.
gives up his plan. Yeah, and you know, some other Bond parodies as well. Like they do a...
Well, the nuclear bomb at the end is totally Goldfinger.
It's just Goldfinger, which is...
Yeah.
And in my mind, those two things are cemented. You know, I talk about Mandela affecting jokes from one movie in this trilogy to another. I probably actually put moments from this in Goldfinger. Because, again, it's like, it rubs up... These movies are so good, they rub up against the real thing so plausibly that sometimes you can just, like, uncross your eyes and forget what you're watching. You
Right.
forget whether you're watching the real thing or the parody.
Yeah.
And there's so many moments like that here that are...
But it's just funny because I'm also looking at my notes and we're talking about how the movie carbon dates itself. So you have references to whole set pieces about Ghost,
Ghost, yeah.
you know? But it's also got one of my favorite moments because when she's touching his chest and it's, it's like the biggest piece of beefcake in the history of the world, but when she reaches into his pants and takes out clay.
Yeah.
And then they cut to a look on Leslie Nielsen's face, which is the most wonderful.
Yes.
Like, it's not even quizzical.
Yeah.
It's matter of fact, but it's like a pleasure.
Yeah.
But not the pleasure of what's happening in the scene.
Right.
I mean, it's just, those are the moments I love.
And that was a Paramount movie as well, so they obviously had the rights to the music, the images, without any unproblematically. I think it's interesting because as a rule, there are some movie parodies in here. As a rule, I always think that the Zucker Abrams people are better, and this is certainly true in the next movie, are always better when they're sending up something that's a little bit older.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they're sending up something that's, something as recent as a year ago, it feels like they're trading off the same jokes that everyone else are.
You're right.
But when they get into,
as opposed to like when you're taking off like dime store detective novels.
Exactly.
That's
that goes all the way back to Airplane, to Airplane being, having actual lines from the airport movies in them.
Yeah.
I just think they're way more comfortable with that kind of classic Hollywood when they do the Psycho parody here and when they do a Casablanca parody here.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels a little bit more educated, a little more nuanced. Like they're picking out things that kind of like, movie buffs.
Right.
But when it's Ghost, it's like, well, it's the pottery scene. That's what everyone makes fun of.
Yeah.
So I think as a rule that's kind of, and there's a great example of it in the next movie, which we'll
But as a
talk about.
movie lover, you love those moments with, the reference to Casablanca and.
Well, absolutely, but it's actually it's like those. The older the parody, the more interestingly it's done.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of general rule here, but
play our song. Play our song.
Ding dong, the witch is dead.
The witch is dead. The witch is dead.
But
it's great.
The Ghost parody feels more like the kind of carbon dating part of the movie than the movie parody part of the movie, which is also. So there are two levels of that kind of movie parody. There's like what's happening in movies now, and there's like what is the classic timeless thing to parody, a Hitchcock movie or a Bogart movie.
Well, and that scene also, because it not only parodies Psycho, but it also parodies action movies because their fight is, I referenced it once already, but we didn't do the whole thing. I talked about the throwing the towel in the face, but the electric toothbrush in the mouth with the foaming, followed by the hair dryer.
I don't want to make it too specific because I think the comedy. It's like probably whatever movie you're thinking it is, but I did think, is that specifically are they thinking about Fatal Attraction? And the struggle in the bathroom, because I got flashbacks to that, but I think it is like it's like comedy that's in the parody is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah,
you could think of like,
for me it was more general action comedy where like the
the
knife
towel
is
on the
slowly
face.
coming. Yeah, the knife, but instead it's the electric toothbrush, followed by the thing you find next to your whatever you're fighting next to, and in this scene it just happens to be the hair dryer.
Yeah.
I
agree. I think,
but that to me is when this movie is at its best. When those are the jokes, I'm in love with this movie.
Yeah, I think when they,
or even a simple line like Jane grabbing him, he says, "Jane, you're hurting me."
Yes. And that's kind of interesting because the next movie will start to really start to make jokes about gender fluidity in a way that's
Yeah.
increasingly uncomfortable. But here, I feel like it's just for the the fun of reversing the trope.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like in that moment, the fact that she grabs him instead of her, and he gets. I mean, it's like, yes, you can say it's part of a pattern that you start to see where, you know, men acting like women is funny, and that's not a good thing.
Mhm.
But in that moment is the fact that they, you know, that just it just switches your expectations, and that creates the comedy.
And that's why it's comedy, right? That's why it's funny.
And also, you know, the when she takes off her high heels.
Yeah,
And
right.
she's like 2 foot tall, which again is like, you know, it's like that you think, but you would think that that would be the joke you have with a man. The fact that it's a woman doing it makes it funnier somehow.
Right.
But I don't know why. But I don't think it's offensive. It's my,
I don't know.
I may be
Right.
wrong, but I don't think that element of this movie is offensive. But they cross the line.
Well, the other one that I think they get, like they get to a T, that's really fantastic is the interrogation towards the end, where the money's going back and forth.
Oh, but that's a really important point because, like the running gag of Police Squad was the shoe shine
Right.
informer who
Yeah.
would tell him everything he needed
Everything.
to know. He would, while he was having his shoe shines, he would just keep giving him money, and he would he would give him an encyclopedic knowledge of everything. So they needed to come up with something different but equally as funny as that here.
Mhm.
And also they don't have that actor. So the fact that they have this scene where where Frank Drebin and a suspect are exchanging money between them for interrogation is a nice
I don't
rephrasing
remember.
of that.
Yeah, do you remember now? No, it's still a little hazy. How about now?
That's so true, because that's when this movie's on fire. It's rephrasing old jokes in a way that are just as inventive, but they're
Right.
just not. They're not new. You know, they've been done.
They're not new, but yeah, exactly. They just work.
The only time it kind of
Followed by the explosion, and he's trying to get information out of somebody, and he dies. And he says, "All right, who else is almost dead?"
when they when they narrow it, it's all the way back to Airplane and Police Squad. When they narrow in on a trope,
Right.
when they identify that trope,
And send up the trope.
that's to me when it works perfectly well. Is when you know, you can't relate it to, like, you know, I threw Fatal Attraction, but I can think of 1,000 bad action, you know, like hysterical action sequences in small spaces. I mean, that was the 80s, basically. You know, that was the entire decade of movies. So yeah, I think that's where the movie's kind of firing on all cylinders. And again, just that sort of slightly elusive, not elusive, but ILL, elusive quality of, like, these two guys could be doing this scene for real, because, you know, I guess not Leslie Nielsen at this point, but at some point in his career, it could have been Leslie Nielsen and Anthony James in a fight
Yeah.
scene in something for real. There
real.
probably is one out there. And I just love that.
Well,
that
and I
sort of,
also,
you blink and you forget that it's parody. That
and
they're
what
able
you
to just
what you have
pull back.
more than anything is the overwhelming sense of the Zucker brothers being movie fans themselves. There's even that moment towards the end when O.J. Simpson kind of lets it out of the bag that there is a nuclear bomb, or that there is a bomb, and everybody starts panicking.
Yes.
And that one person walks across the screen and he says, "It's a cookbook. It's a cookbook."
That's right. Twilight
Which is like-
Zone.
Total reference to a Twilight Zone episode, which is, I mean, unless you love Twilight Zone, you're not going to get that. And so,
This is the first time I would have known that watching the movie as well.
really,
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably. I mean, I watched these movies very young and haven't seen them for a long time.
Because I used to watch The Twilight Zone all the time as a kid.
I don't think I'd seen that one at that particular
Right.
point. I that's so true. They're able to just, but particularly that era, I think,
Yeah.
when they were in that 50s, 60s era of
When they
media,
call back to that, it's really delicious.
they
Calling back to a movie that came out the year before this one is, of course, just going to be less so.
and that's kind of, as a point of contrast, that's really all we get in the next movie.
Yeah, exactly right.
Because they have an Academy Awards theme, which, for exactly what you're saying, the fact that the Zuckers are movie lovers seems like a good move. But what it actually does is it kind of traps you in a, it traps you into doing lots of movie parodies that otherwise you wouldn't necessarily have in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's part of the big part of the problem there is that they you want to keep your movie parodies separate from your carbon dating.
Well, and right.
That age-old saying.
Yeah. Well, because I know, and it's not just the Zuckers, because what's the other, they're always with Pat Proft, I believe.
Yes.
And because they're involved in the next one, but it's not directed. It's, somebody else takes over the directing helm.
Interesting.
So I don't know if that had a part to do with that or not.
It would, I mean, it would seem to, I think, this is a movie that feels expert in every department.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like anyone is missing the boat anywhere. Whereas I definitely get the sense with the next movie that
That's how I felt. The
just-
clever jokes just aren't in the next one for me.
well, it's
The 6'3", awfully big mustache. That kind of stuff's void from that movie.
it's all a sliding scale, but I think you've got to get that you've got to have a real level of craft behind the most ludicrous joke.
Well, right.
You have to
if
have
you're
that
gonna do this,
combination or it
if
all
you're
falls
gonna
apart.
do this kind of movie, and we've talked about this several times, yes, the level of craft has to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as you said, the joke rate has to be at a high rate, and they have to land at that rate.
And that's
And this movie delivers.
I think so. And what's kind of interesting to the first movie and the third movie are very much centered around big set pieces.
Mm-hmm.
It works in the first one. It works less well in the third one. It's still
Right.
the saving grace of the movie, but it works less well for sure. Here, I can't think of any one set piece that is outstanding, but the comedy. I just think of the comedy throughout.
There's a comedy through line.
Yeah, exactly.
That is it's carrying the blood and the oxygen to the whole movie.
Yeah, and I remember looking at the mariachi scene towards the end of this movie and thinking, well, I mean that pales in comparison to the baseball stadium sequence from
Right.
the last movie, but I'm not just sometimes I feel like the Naked Gun is kind of pinning all its hopes on that sequence sometimes, at least structurally. But I never feel that here. I feel like,
No, yeah, I'll agree with that.
all
That,
the bits kind of pay off. It's gone
Yeah.
all back way to the beginning, but the scene where the custodians are holding a bomb and then just talking about
right.
well, it's a clock, or it's who would throw away this nice clock? And there's a scene.
It's got the wrong time. Let
Yeah,
me wind it for you. Yeah.
and they just it feels like they farmed out the comedy in every part of the movie, and I think that's why I always gravitated back towards this one, because I just felt it was a fuller experience as a film, as a screenplay. Right, like it's even like letting other actors in the movie do the Leslie Nielsen look to camera. I think makes a huge difference. In the Casablanca parody scene, the waiter turns to the camera at one point and just shakes his head at something that Leslie Nielsen said.
Well, it was the bar scene.
Yeah.
And at first he says, "Give me something strong," and so a well-oiled, muscled man shows up.
Yeah.
And he says, "On second thought, just give me a black Russian."
And he looks at the camera and shakes his head.
He looks at the camera.
Yeah. And I feel I don't know, something about it feels holistic.
Yeah.
the comedy in this. And another,
I guess for me, I gravitated towards the first one because they were so laser focused on that sort of dime store detective novel that's really throughout the whole thing, and I love that about that.
I'm
movie.
not disparaging that movie at all, but I
know.
I wanted to I wanted to believe that there was a reason other than having to rewind the tape back to the beginning that meant I'd watch this more. And but watching back at it, I can give myself the credit of saying I think this is a smarter overall screenplay than the original movie, and so I can see why, even young me would have gravitated towards it. Another running gag that I think is excellent in this is, and it's such a cinematic thing. This is what, and again, this goes back to everything we're saying about when they nail the trope and send it up, they're just, it's perfect comedy.
Right.
There's 2 or 3 stunt double jokes in here when Leslie Nielsen is replaced by stunt actors.
Yes, right.
Whether it's dancers or body doubles, I every time it happens, I think it's just perfect. I mean, jumping over rails, behind computers, especially as a fan of the Bond films and the late Roger Moore Bond films, and everything in View to a Kill is everything you see that's active is not Roger Moore,
right?
And here, I think the fact that they make a virtue of that. Repeatedly, that Leslie Nielsen that they're not shying away from the fact that Leslie Nielsen is an aging actor, and he's like, he can do physical comedy, but he's not gonna do the work of an action star.
He's not gonna jump from the second story to the first story.
And pointing out those those clashes when the stunt actors
It's a great runner, and they continue it from the first movie because he's doing flips and stuff in his own apartment in that movie.
Right. And for some reason, I always remember the image of him crashing through when he's at the docks. He crashes through the roof. The stunt actor crashes through the roof, and he's a complete mess. And then he slicks back his hair, and he's perfect again.
And he's coiffed.
And that's people who have seen movies where film continuity has been horribly butchered.
Right.
And yet, just think what it takes to get that continuity wrong. The extra effort you have to go through to get the continuity wrong in that way is twice as much as you would have to keep track of how much drink is in a glass.
Yeah.
So, I'm
just this movie's comedically wonderful.
Yeah.
And that's my final word on the subject. Anything else for you?
No, I don't think so. I think it's all been said.
Yeah.
I think it's off color moments in this movie that probably weren't much of a concern for people at the time. But they're a concern now, but this is the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. We'll get to that.
And you would think that this being the older movie, that this would be more problematic than the movie made in 94, but apparently not. Apparently we were going backwards.
We went backwards as we went forwards.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you have something to say on the subject of the Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear, by all means, let us know on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or send us an email to everythingsequel@gmail.com. For Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions, I am Michael Shantz. I'm from the How Dare You Awards. You'll hear us next time for the Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult. Say goodbye, Tom.
Who else is almost dead?
I love that line so much. All right, take care, everybody.